I scored a sweet deal on the very first Intel iMac made. And in this video, I'm going to show you what it takes to convert it to something that will run Windows 10. Now, what I don't show you in this video is before you start, you have to upgrade the firmware to a firmware that will support the 64-bit architecture. It's really straightforward to do, and you can find all the details in the description below. Do that first, and then you do the swap. Let's dig in. So let's take the screws out of the bottom of the computer. The first two come out are for the RAM expansion port. And then the next ones are just the bottom of the case. And when you go to take this apart, you're going to have to move these arms out of the way to get it to clear. The top of the case is held together with some snaps or some little clips, and you have to use a credit card to get them apart. Let's freeze, and I'll show you what it looks like inside. When you put your card in, you want to catch the edge of the card on the latch, and that will swing it out of the way and unlock the case. So with the card right up against the corner, you push up and you'll feel it click and release. Repeat on the other side, and the case should just come right apart. Now it's still attached by the camera and the mic, so let's unplug them. And now the top frame or the outer frame is free to be set aside. Now let's get this tape off. Just pick at it a little bit with your thumb and just keep picking, scrape, and you pick, and you just keep scraping and picking. Just keep at it, keep scraping. Oh, for the love. Get out your speed knife. It'll be so fast with your speed knife. It tore along the sides. I taped it back together when I put it back together, but honestly, I don't know how much it matters. This is the screen connection to the motherboard. 2 screws to remove the tie down. That's amazing camera work. Once you've got the screws out, you just pull on this tab and it will release. All right, let's use that speed knife. Get rid of all the tape all the way around the screen. And now we've got 4 screws that hold the LCD in. The screws are in deeper than my screwdriver would reach, so I'd pull the bit out and let it just protrude enough that I could get some of the screwdriver attached to the bit, and it would just give me enough bite to undo the screws. Now once you're sure you've got all the tape off, pick up the screws that go flying. And now when you lift this up, there's one more wire on this model that has the backlight. Some models might have 2 wires and they might be in different places, so you just have to be very careful lifting it up that there's nothing still attached. And now there's still tape attaching the top of the screen to the case. Speed knife to the rescue. And the screen's free. Remove the screws for the speakers. And then you can start to unplug some of the wiring, most of which is really easy to remove. However, 2 of them are difficult, and the iFixit guide that I was using told me to pull the connector straight away from the motherboard like I'm trying with pliers. That's wrong. They unplugged like all the rest. They slide parallel to the motherboard. If you pulled straight off, you'd pull that connector right off the motherboard and probably ruin it. So all of the ones on the left where I am now, they all pulled parallel to the board. I'm going to undo a couple screws for the heatsink. And then you have to undo the screws all around the motherboard. There are maybe a dozen or so, and one of them on the top left has a ground that looks like about a 1-inch piece of metal. Just remember where it goes. And you gotta pull the motherboard out, and the power supply is connected to the motherboard in a really awkward location directly underneath it, but it just unclips like any power supply does, and there's your motherboard. Now, I upgraded to an SSD drive, so we're going to pull out the old magnetic drive. Now, while I'm undoing this hard drive, I'll tell you what I did was I used a program called SuperDupe that took an image of this magnetic drive that had OS 10.6.8 installed, and I duplicated it to an SSD drive, and it compacts the image up, it does everything it needs to do, and then I can format the SSD to have a partition for Windows and Linux, because I was going to try both, and I'm done. So I bought this carrier on Amazon. It allows you to plug in a small drive into the bigger housing, and it adapts all the electronics and stuff, so you don't have to fuss with it. And then you install this carrier on the side, upside down, plug in the cables, realize that you've plugged the carrier in upside down, take it out, flip it over, make sure your cables are out of the way, and snap it in. Now, there's a temperature sensor on this hard drive, and I was able to just pry it off. It left just enough glue on the back of the sensor that I was able to stick it on the SSD drive in roughly the same location, and it ended up working quite well. Now, this thing is pretty filthy, so I took a vacuumed all of the dust out, and then I've got a makeup brush that my wife so generously gave me. It works really well at getting all those little places that you ordinarily can't reach. And now onto the motherboard. Boy, look at the dust in there, eh? Let's clean that out. Alright, so we're going to take the screws out of the motherboard that hold the heatsink on, and it lifts the heatsink off from this side, but the CPU's on the opposite side. So you set that aside, and then you can lift the motherboard free of the bottom half of the heatsink. I understand the other models that are similar to this have a different method where the heatsink holds or cools the CPU and the GPU, and apparently it's a real pain to remove, but this was really easy. Use a small flathead screwdriver and just unscrew that 180 degrees, and that'll let you remove the CPU out. You can do what you want with the chip. I enjoyed it with salsa later. And here's my Core Duo 2. They're available on eBay for about $2 or $3 from China shipped. Pretty good deal if you ask me. If you want the faster speeds, they can go up to $30, but honestly, a 15% speed increase didn't matter to me. 180 degrees clockwise, and it snaps it right back into place. Now, I had some leftover thermal compound from another project, so I just used that. And I smeared it a smooth but thin coating over the whole chip. And then I cleaned off the back of the heatsink. It had the old compound on there. It was pretty grungy. Just used a little alcohol and a Q-tip and got it nice and clean. I'm going to very carefully align these up. I really don't like to move it around too much, but you can see it's take two because I had some compound on the heatsink already. Get it lined up, and you should be able to see the threaded parts of the holes through the motherboard. Now replace the back half. and carefully do up your 4 screws. I'm plugging the connection for the screen to the motherboard and the backlight. And now I took a magnet and I put it on my bit. That allows me to magnetize the bit enough to get the screw on and then carefully thread it down that hole. If you don't do that, the screw will just fall down inside. Be lost to time forever. By the time I got to the 3rd screw, my bit was sufficiently magnetized that I didn't really even need it anymore. I could just hold it like normal. Put the screws back in the harness for the LCD. Button up your tape. I used a little Captain and electrical tape in places to hold it down well. And you've got to plug in your camera and microphone. That wiring is a pretty tight fit, so stand the unit up and you'll see how they slot into place. Once they're out of the way, the 2 halves will fit together nice and easily. Pull them together and they click. Move the arms for the RAM out of the way and slide the bottom halves together. And you're done. You didn't put those 4 screws in, right? I'm telling you, don't. If you put them in, it probably won't work. Leave them out, it's almost a sure thing. You won't have any problems. Now, what operating system are we going to run? We've got Mac OS X, Linux, or Windows. I looked at all 3. For OS X, I looked at 10.7 Lion, which is the last version of OS X that can be installed on this machine. There's a few hacks to get a slightly later version running, but it doesn't matter because none of them have a modern browser, and that's really what matters. So that's it. Next, I looked at Elementary OS. It's a really beautiful operating system, and it supports everything I'd need. However, there's a problem with the graphics driver that's never been resolved, and nobody's contributed it to the open source driver since 2012. So I wasn't holding on my breath on that being fixed anytime soon, and I don't have the skill to dig in and fix it. So that's out. So that leaves me with good old Windows 10. In order for me to get to Windows 10 though, I had to install Windows 7 and then upgrade to 10. And that's because this machine, originally a 32-bit machine, has a 32-bit EFI. That means that the boot up sequence needs 32 bits, but because I've installed a new CPU, I can use a 64-bit operating system. The Windows 10 install disk, when it sees that it's a 64-bit CPU, automatically assumes it's a 64-bit EFI and it fails. So I went to a Windows 7 that I know would work. The Windows 7 disk, however, would give me this really strange prompt of please pick a key, but it didn't allow me to press anything on the keyboard. I found lots of information about people saying you have to hook up 2 keyboards and press 1 and enter at the same time, but that didn't work. So I found a workaround and I'll go through it. So there's really 4 steps. I've got to partition the drive, modify the Windows 7 install it, and then upgrade to Windows 10. To partition the drive, I used Boot Camp. I got rid of my Linux partition, and that all worked pretty much without a hitch. I didn't download the Boot Camp drivers, but I'll show you on my GitHub that I've got all of the drivers necessary to install. To install Windows 7, I had to modify the boot sector of the CD using a tool from Microsoft, OS CD IMG. And again, on GitHub, I've got it all listed out about what you need to do to create the new ISO that I had to burn in order to get Windows 7 to install. Once that was done, install Windows 7. I didn't need a product key and I didn't need any drivers. I just let it install and run in safe mode. And then I was able to upgrade to Windows 10. I was able to buy a key for it and license Windows and activate it, no problem at all. So was it worth it? Well, the machine was about 50 bucks, and SSDs around another 50 or 60. The carrier was 20, and I've got a machine that runs YouTube in 720p really smoothly. Yeah, I'd say it was worth it. It's a nice little machine for the workshop.